And does anybody remember which king made the command to take them captive? Raise your hand really high if you know. Joshua, do you know? Say it again. Nebuchadnezzar. That's exactly who did it. And what was the nation's name that Nebuchadnezzar was king of? Okay. Evan.
Babylon.
He was from Babylon. Way to go. So they were taken. We saw that God honored Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right out of the gate by allowing them to find favor. We talked a little bit about that in the eyes of the king's men. Because remember, they were being offered food that they weren't supposed to eat. You guys remember that one from week 1? And Daniel said, hey, no, can you test us if we just have the vegetables and water? Test us to make sure that we are just as good as everybody else. So they did that for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, Daniel and his friends looked, the Bible said they looked fatter. Now, it doesn't mean heavy. It meant that they looked very healthy. And so God showed his faithfulness to Daniel and his friends. Last week and the week before, we saw that the king was very troubled because he had a dream. And in the dream, it was very disturbing. And so he wanted all the wise men of the land to tell him what his dream was and what it meant. And so the first wise men came in and told them what the dream was and what it meant. And that was it. Everybody lived happily ever after. No? No. Nobody could tell him what the dream meant. And so the king ordered all the wise men to be put to death. But Daniel said, hey, give me a few days. I am going to seek wisdom from my God. And then I'll tell you what your dream was. And he prayed. God revealed what the dream was. Daniel went to the king, told him what the dream was and what it meant. And at the end of last week, we saw that the king promoted Daniel to basically kind of head wise man. He was put over a group of people. And so when we pick it up this week, that's where Daniel is. Oh, by the way, we also ended last week by showing that Nebuchadnezzar acknowledged that Daniel's God was the true God. But guess what? We are going to see right from the beginning of this week, it didn't change his heart. Do you know there's a lot of people in the world that acknowledge, they say, oh, I believe there's a God. But for many of them, they don't really believe what God says in their heart. And there's a big difference. You can say, I believe in God, or there is a God, but the question is, do you believe in God and that his word is the truth? That's the difference. Nebuchadnezzar didn't. And we see that. We're going to be in chapter 3, Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold. This must have been spectacular. You want to know how big this image was? The Bible tells us it is 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. Anybody know what a cubit is? Do you know what a cubit is?
No.
All right. Go ahead. It's not 3 feet. Anybody else? It's a good guess. A cubit is about, oh, go ahead, Christopher. It's more. A cubit is about from here to here. Or in most places they would say 18 inches. However, in Babylon, a cubit was 20 inches. Go figure. Babylon had their own measurements. And so about 20 inches. So if it's 60 cubits high and we went off of 18 inches, that would tell us this image is 90 feet tall. Now, if I were to go up to the tippy top of this peak, I'm trying to think, Mr. Danny, what do you think the height is here?
This is probably close to 20.
All right.
22.
22 feet, all right? So good guess. So let's say, I wonder who stood up there holding the tape measure. It'd be kind of hard to get up there. But, so 20 feet. We would have to stack 4 of our churches on top of each other and half of another one to get to 90 feet. Does that kind of give you an idea of how tall this image was? And the reason the king wanted it this big was because he wanted all of the officials of the land, and there was a lot of them, he wanted them all to bow down and worship the image of him. Now, does that sound like a guy who believes in the one true God? No. No. In fact, he is putting himself above God and commanding that people actually worship him. So bad king again. And so after this is built, he puts orders out for all of the officials in the land to come to this dedication of this image. And we learn that Daniel and his friends are in a province just outside of Babylon, about 6 miles away. So 6 miles isn't very far in a car. It'd probably be a long ways to walk. But they're about 6 miles away, and Nebuchadnezzar orders them all to come. He orders, this is in order of rank. He orders satraps, administrators. Daniel was an administrator, so he's kind of in the second from the top most powerful people. Governors, counselors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, all of the officials in the land gathered together at the dedication of the image of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, he gives another command. So don't just come. Here's the command. He says, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time that you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music." Anybody know what a psaltery is? I remember reading this for the first time and getting stuck on that verse because I thought, what in the world is a psaltery? But these are all going to be instruments and things that would draw your attention to something big. And so when the symphony sounds, he says, "You shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up." And you want to know how serious Nebuchadnezzar was about this? Listen to this. He says, "And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace." Now, that kind of made me think. I'm reading that and thinking, why did the king have to threaten the people before he ever told them what he was going to have them do? And it dawned on me, because many of the people there didn't want to fall down and worship the king. And I think the king knew it. And maybe he was thinking of the people from Israel that had been brought over, that were now officials in the land. He wanted to make sure everybody bowed down and worshiped. Now, I don't know about you, but I would prefer, if somebody was to give me a little bit of honor, that they do it because they want to, not because I'm making them. Could you imagine if I went home and I said to my son, "It's my birthday. You better give me a card. Because if you don't get to eat dinner for the rest of your life." I mean, that would not be cool. If my son wants to give me a birthday card, I want him to give me one because he wants to do it. The king said, some of you might want to, but just in case you don't, you better do it. Because if you don't fall down and worship the image, I'm going to have you thrown into a fiery furnace. Anybody ever gotten too close to the fireplace before? Raise your hand if you've ever burned yourself. Yeah, done that many times. I think I might have told some of you this story a few years ago, but I was out. I love to barbecue. And so I like to go out. I light my grill. I let it sit out there so it gets nice and hot. And it smells good from things that it might have cooked on it before. It's still, you walk out and you go, "Oh yeah, this is going to be great." Well, one time I went out to light it, and my grill, you push a button, and it clicks. So I turn the gas on, click the button, click, poof, lights up, everything's great. Well, this one particular time I went out there, turned on the gas, hit the button, click, nothing. Click, nothing. Click, 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 nothing. It is not lighting. I'm thinking, all right, I can defeat the grill. I'm going to go in the house. I'm going to get a match. I'm going to come out. I will light that grill. I forgot to turn the gas off. So I go in the house. I get the match. I come back out. I light the match. I go to throw it into the grill, and fire coming up all around me. I'm moving out of the way, and I used to be able to move fast. I moved as quick as I could to get out of the way, and I'm thinking, whew, that was close. And so I'm standing there for a minute, and then something's burning. And I didn't realize it, but it had burned all of the hair of my eyebrows completely off. Now, I didn't know that. So I go in the house to get the meat because I'm going to come out. And I go in and my wife says, "What is that smell?" And I'm like, "Oh, I got really close to the fire, but whew, I made it okay." And she starts laughing. And I'm thinking, what is she laughing? She goes, "Look in the mirror." So I go down the hall, I look in the mirror, whoa, I have no eyebrows. And I stunk like burnt hair. So that was close. I have never been thrown into a fiery furnace, and that was the threat. Kind of makes you think. Do you love God enough, and don't answer this, but just think about it. Do you love God enough that if somebody threatened you with something that didn't feel good, if you continue to love them and they say, "Hey, if you continue to worship your God, you're going to get hurt." Do you love God enough to say, "I'm going to love God anyway"? Well, that's a big question for kids. We're not going to dive into that tonight. But Daniel and his friends had that question. Do we fall down and worship the statue? Because we serve the one true God. Because if we don't, we know we could be thrown into the fire. Well, guess what? The music sounds. It says this, verse 7. So at the time, when all the people heard the sound of the harp, flute, horn, lyre, in symphony with all kinds of other music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Except. You see, it doesn't tell us in verse 7 the except, but we learn in the next couple of verses except Daniel's three friends. We don't know where Daniel was at this time. He's not even mentioned in this chapter. So Daniel may have been out on business for the king. Maybe he was sick. We don't know, but he wasn't there. But his three friends were. What are their names? Go ahead, Nathan. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were there, and they did not fall down and worship God. Do you want to know something? They would have stood out big time because everybody else would have fallen down. So let me do this. Lily and Luke, let's see, Nathan and Isaiah, and let me grab Tommy and Joshua. Guys, come up here. And you're just going to stand right here facing them. All right? Now, all right, so we have some tall guys. They kind of stand out. And then some medium. And so we're just going to say, let me add to this. Gracie, come on up here. I'm going to put you guys slide down a little bit. You stand right here. Okay? So on the count of 3, everybody is going to fall to your knees except for Isaiah and Gracie. All right? Are you guys ready? 1, 2, 3. Is it easy to see Isaiah and Gracie right now? When they were all standing up, do they stand out at that time? No. They stand out like crazy right now. You guys can go back. So when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not fall down to worship the king, everybody would have been able to see them in their area. That's not good for them. Or is it? Let's read what happens. It says this, verse 8, therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and they accused the Jews. Now, that word accused doesn't mean that they just came up and said to the officials, there's a couple guys back there. I don't know, maybe their back was hurting or something. They didn't really fall down and worship the king. They probably liked him and everything, but no. This word accused means they literally were feasting on them. In other words, when they came, it sounded more like this. We can't believe it. Those Jewish people that the king put in charge of areas around here, they have spited the king, and they did not fall down and worship him. They deserve to be thrown into the fiery furnace. So this would have been like really bad. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Nebuchadnezzar, and we're going to have to wrap it up here in just a minute. Nebuchadnezzar really liked Daniel and his friends. Remember last week we talked about reputation? Do you remember that? And we said your reputation is what people think of you. So if you're a really nice person, your reputation is that you're a really nice person. We talked about that last week. I think that here was our super really nice person. But then we also talked about that if you're like a really mean person and you're not nice, you don't say nice things, then that's what people think of you. That was Ryder last week, even though he's really a nice person. Yeah, Presley might have stories. But that was the reputation. The reputation of Daniel and his friends were so good that the king liked these guys. And so when the accusation came, and they came and said, "King, you got to throw these guys into the fiery furnace, just like you said," that really hurt the king. These were guys he liked. And so the king thinks, I have to give them a second chance, because I don't want to just throw them into the fiery furnace. I like these guys. Next week, when we pick it up, actually, I still have 3 minutes. Let's see what happens in the next couple of verses. So he comes to them, he brings them in, and he says this. I got to find it. Nebuchadnezzar. No, that's not it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was brought into him, and he says to them, he says, "Now, if you are ready the next time, when you hear the symphony." So guys, I'm going to give you a second chance. If you're ready the next time, verse 15, when you hear the symphony playing and you fall down and worship the image that I have made, good. In other words, he's saying, come on guys, just fall down and worship the image and everything will be just fine. But then he turns a little bit and he says, "But if you do not worship, you will be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands?" I wonder if the guys wanted to raise their hand and go, "I know the answer. I know the answer." But they didn't. But they did respond. And they were bold when they responded, but they were also respectful when they responded. And if you want to know what they said, you can go ahead by next week and read verses 16, 17, and 18, which is where we are going to start next week. So here's where I want to end today. There are going to be times, boys and girls, even at your age, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, we have some 12-year-olds, there are going to be, and even for us adults, there are going to be times when we are going to be pressured to do something that does not please God. And maybe it's a friend that says, "Oh, don't worry about what your mom says. Do it anyway." Or maybe it's somebody from school, or maybe it's somebody from across the street. But we are going to be pressured sometimes to do things that we know are not right. Just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The question is, boys and girls, are we going to be like Daniel in chapter 1 where it said he purposed in his heart not to disobey God? Are we going to be like that and say, "I can't do that. I can't go with you to that place because my mom said no. My mom said I have to go in." Whatever it is, are we going to make that choice to obey God even if somebody might not like us? Even if somebody might make fun of us at some point? I don't think anybody's going to throw us into a fiery furnace like these guys. But sometimes it hurts when somebody says they don't like us or they don't want to be our friends. Sometimes that can hurt. But the question is God more important to us? We're going to get into this more next week, and we're going to see what happens with these three guys and whether they cave or whether they decide to stand up and serve their God. But let's bow our heads. Father, thank you for your word. Thanks for these guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And Lord, we can learn from them. Thank you that they made the decision to stand up and to obey you. So help us to do that too, even when it might not feel good. Lord, help us to always want to obey you. And we give you thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.